International Olympic Committee what its rules ought to be. And this is a matter that has undergone some serious review multiple times by the Olympic Committee.
The Trump administration has taken aim broadly at transgender rights since taking office on January 20th. While Trump supporters have hailed the president for making good on campaign promises, critics say Trump has overstepped his executive authority.
Under the Trump administration, we will defend the proud tradition of female athletes, and we will not allow men to beat up, injure, and cheat our women and our girls. From now on, women's sports will be only for women.
For a lot of trans youth out there, it just means, once again, their country's declaring war on them. And this is going to affect people's mental health. I'll admit it's affected mine, and I'm 53 years old. I mean, but for young people coming up, especially for these kids, and especially in middle school and high school, this is very difficult. This is brutal on them. It's harsh on their families. And don't think that this is the end of it. This is part of a whole program to essentially erase transgender Americans from American life. And yes, just to note, transgender Americans are just that. We're Americans.
Today is another example, at the highest level in seat and position and power in the world, watching the new president of the United States articulate complete, utter nonsense and doing complete harm to the most vulnerable communities in his own society within the boundaries of the United States, which will have generational harm long term.
One win does not make domination. One kid winning one race at a national championship swim meet 3 years ago is not domination. But they're trying to say this fear because, let's face it, Donald Trump knows he's lying about transgender Americans. Riley Gaines knows she's lying about transgender athletes. The thing that they're banking on is that you, the average person out there, doesn't know they're lying. That's what they're banking on.
Female athletes have been forced onto the front lines, and men claiming to be girls have stolen more than 3,500 victories. That's a lot. And invaded more than 11,000 competitions designed for women.
First of all, the numbers they don't exist. Understand that there's 0.01% gender variant people living in our society as a whole. So it's a very tiny grouping of people that he's actually targeting. And certainly the numbers in terms of gender performance are filled with inaccuracies as well. Those numbers just don't exist. And it's incomprehensible of somebody in the highest seat in the world, the most powerful seat in the world, to project such misinformation, not just in the United States, but globally on such an issue that has a tremendous impact in the United States, but also worldwide.
We have to learn now. If we wait until the next edition of the games and it does not work, it's too late. So we have to work at a moment where overall we are enjoying this huge success.
Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Donald Trump has found a new enemy. He is now waging a battle against South Africa. They're hosting the G20 summit this year and Trump's Secretary of State wants to boycott it. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has called up Elon Musk to defuse tensions. But if things go south, Musk could be on the receiving end as well. Because South Africa, along with the European Union and China, are making moves. They want to punish America's biggest tech titans over Trump's tariffs. We'll bring you the full story. Meanwhile, the US president is dialing down his plans to build the Gaza Riviera. But where did the idea come from in the first place? Was Jared Kushner behind it? We'll try to join the dots for you. In India, the return of illegal migrants has sparked a controversy. In Bangladesh, protesters tear down the home of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman after a speech from Sheikh Hasina. How big tech companies are playing catch-up with China's DeepSeek. Why car maker Kia is under scrutiny of India's tax authorities. And should mobile phones be banned in schools? Does it even help? We'll bring you the findings of a new study. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Another day, another shooting in Belgium. A drug-related shooting in Brussels injures one person. It happened close to the site of Wednesday's incident, which had sparked a manhunt. In the last 24 hours, there have been 3 shootings in Brussels, all linked to turf wars between rival drug gangs. France delivers its first consignment of Mirage 2000 fighter jets to Ukraine. President Emmanuel Macron had announced the decision to do so in June last year. Paris has trained Ukrainian pilots to use these jets. Last August, Ukraine received its first batch of US-made F-16 fighter jets. The Sudan's army advances on central Khartoum. The troops are nearing the paramilitary-controlled Republican Palace. The army has been at war with the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces since April 2023. In recent weeks, it has mounted a fierce offensive to reclaim full control of the capital. Australia passes anti-hate crime laws. An offence like a Nazi salute will land you in jail for a year. The new laws also impose minimum jail sentences of 12 months for hate crimes and displaying hate symbols. This comes after a string of anti-Semitic attacks in the country. And Fiji's rugby union fires its director after she reportedly questioned if the national women's side had a gay problem. The former player was appointed just days ago. She is also said to have criticised lesbianism within the women's rugby setup. Is Donald Trump alone the US president, or does he have a co-president in Elon Musk? Ask South Africa. They are on Musk's hit list and by extension Trump's. This has led to a diplomatic spat between the US and South Africa, and it threatens to derail global cooperation. It threatens to undermine the G20. Let's tell you how it began. With another social media post by President Trump, he paused aid to South Africa and launched an investigation. A probe into land confiscations in South Africa. Trump says, and I'm quoting, they're treating certain classes of people very badly. Listen to this.
Terrible things are happening in South Africa. The leadership is doing some terrible things, horrible things. So that's under investigation right now. We'll make a determination. And until such time as we find out what South Africa is doing, they're taking away land, they're confiscating land. And actually, they're doing things that are perhaps far worse than that.
Yesterday, the US upped the ante. Their foreign minister weighed in. Secretary of State Marco Rubio put up this message. He said he would not attend the G20 summit in Johannesburg this month. It is scheduled for the 20th and 21st of February, but Rubio says he won't go. He parroted Trump's accusations, saying, and I quote, South Africa is doing very bad things, like expropriating private property and using the G20 to promote DEI. DEI is diversity, equity and inclusion. Donald Trump hates it, so does his Republican Party. They don't care for diversity. They say it is inefficient. So part of Rubio's boycott is because of that. He also took a jibe at climate change. Again, Trump and his team are climate change deniers. They think global warming is a hoax. So they think sustainability initiatives are a waste of time. And Rubio fired a parting shot. He said, and I quote, my job is to advance America's national interests, not waste taxpayer money or coddle anti-Americanism. Under Trump, DEI and climate change initiatives are a waste and apparently anti-American. I won't get into that argument here. But let's focus on the US reaction. Rubio is ditching the G20 summit altogether. South Africa is the chair this year. They hold the G20 presidency until November this year. The main summit will take place in November. This month's meeting is for G20 foreign ministers, and Rubio's absence is not really a big deal. There's a long time to go for the main summit, and knowing Trump, the political climate may change by then. So it's not like he's ditching the G20. Not yet. But the statement about it being a waste of taxpayer money is quite interesting. The G20, remember, was formed in 1999, a grouping of the world's 20 biggest economies. For years, it was a toothless group. Then came the 2008 financial crisis. That's when the G20 really started to matter. It was a forum for the world's biggest economies, a place where they could work together. But since the crisis ended, the G20 hasn't really had the same sort of impact, barring a few incidents. Ideas are proposed, tall promises are made, but without a crisis to deal with, it's mostly a talk shop. So you could say that it is a waste of taxpayer money. That being said, what is the alternative? Should we just stop international coordination altogether? Should it be every country for itself? That doesn't work in the globalized economy. The 2008 crisis was caused by US banks being reckless. It hurt the entire world. That's why the G20 gained prominence in the first place. If you want to do away with some of the extra events, that is fine. I suppose foreign ministers can just have a big Zoom meeting. But the G20 itself, the spirit of cooperation, that should not be allowed to fizzle away, especially for what seems to be South Africa's internal issue. Let's take a closer look at the US-South Africa spat. Beyond the DEI and the climate excuses, the heart of the matter seems to be land. As you know, South Africa is a former colony. The British were there and the Dutch before them. They oppressed the local population. They put racist laws in place, typical colonial exploitation, the after effects of which are still very much evident. Look at this land distribution chart. White South Africans make up about 7% of the country's population. But even in 2022, almost 3 decades after the end of apartheid, they owned over 78% of all the farmland. White South Africans own about half of all the land in the country and 78% of the farmland, and they make up just 7% of the population. How is this still possible or acceptable? It's because land distribution is a contentious issue in South Africa. They have struggled to find a way to redistribute land for years. Last month, they brought a new law. A law that allows the South African government to seize land, that too without compensation. It's not some blanket permission though. It's only under exceptional circumstances. South Africa's president, Cyril Ramaphosa, tried to explain this. He insisted that no land has been seized yet. But that doesn't matter. This new law has still outraged the US. Now you might wonder, why does Washington care about this? Why does Trump? Well, he might not. But one top advisor certainly does, and that is Elon Musk. Musk was born in apartheid South Africa. His father still lives there, and he is very interested in what happens to land there. Musk responded to Ramaphosa's first explanation. He called South Africa's laws openly racist. Now, considering the history, there's a lot of irony in that. But anyway, Ramaphosa realized that he needed to talk to Musk. The South African president arranged a call, then put up a post. Perhaps Ramaphosa thought that his outreach had worked, but it hasn't. When Rubio pulled out of the G20 summit, Musk was there to back him. The billionaire replied with 2 US flag emojis. Clearly, President Ramaphosa's outreach was a failure. Musk will continue to back actions against South Africa, probably until Ramaphosa scraps the law. Until then, expect funding cuts and snubs. Or to quote Trump, perhaps far worse than that. In politics, leverage is everything. Trump is leveraging America's economic might to have his way, but US allies are not pushovers. They have found leverage of their own. They are targeting America's biggest tech tech companies, the multi-billion-dollar tech bros. From Europe to China and now South Africa, governments are launching investigations into Silicon Valley giants. Let's start with the European Union. They have prepared a new weapon to counter Donald Trump. It is called the Brussels bazooka. It sounds like a dangerous weapon, but essentially it's supposed to serve as a shield to defend Europe against Trump's tariffs. Last week, Trump had warned Brussels. He said after Mexico and Canada, Europe could face the wrath of Trump's tariffs.
Am I going to impose tariffs on the European Union? Do you want the truthful answer, or should I give you a political answer? Absolutely. Absolutely. The European Union has treated us so terribly.
Say Trump follows through on this threat and slaps tariffs on European exports to the US. In response, Brussels could target American tech firms. It could impose tough conditions on them. They could be asked to build data centers and keep European data within the continent. And it does not end there. Big tech could be forced to live with tougher rules. Their intellectual property rights could be targeted. FDI or foreign direct investment could be blocked. Their market access could be restricted. All these options are on Europe's table. They could impose all of these measures at once, or they could be selective and apply limited pressure. It entirely depends on the nature of Trump's tariffs. But the Europeans have made up their minds that they will respond in kind. Earlier this week, EU trade ministers held a meeting. They met in Warsaw and discussed the threats made by President Trump. Most of the ministers want Europe to take a stand and resort to quote-unquote punitive action if the need arises. The EU's top leader, Ursula von der Leyen, agrees with this.
When targeted, unfairly or arbitrarily, the European Union will respond firmly.
If Brussels retaliates, American tech giants will be on the receiving end. But why has Europe chosen to target them, the big tech companies? Because big tech is among Trump's closest political allies and his biggest financial backers. Just look at the clips from Trump's inauguration. The president was surrounded by Silicon Valley bigwigs. They even donated to his inauguration fund. Trump's biggest backer is Elon Musk. He practically lives with him in the White House. Others have built a strong rapport. Clearly, American big tech is a top ally of President Donald Trump, and that's exactly why they are the top target for Europe. Also for China. Last week, Trump slapped import tariffs on China. Beijing retaliated with counter tariffs and opened a probe into Google, the search giant. This move came with a warning.
What is needed now is not imposing additional tariffs unilaterally, but dialogue and consultation on an equal footing and with mutual respect. We urge the U.S. to stop politicizing and instrumentalizing economic and trade issues, and to stop unreasonably suppressing Chinese companies.
Trump and Xi Jinping are set to talk this week. They will try to ease the trade tensions, and the developing world is watching closely, possibly also taking inspiration. South Africa, for instance, is witnessing a fierce debate, and Starlink is at the center of it. That's the satellite internet service of Elon Musk. He wants to launch Starlink in South Africa. But for that, he wants some rules to be changed. Specifically, he wants ownership rules to be relaxed. You see, in South Africa, telecom operators need a license to operate, and any foreign investor must share equity. They must partner with a black-owned business to secure the telecom license. That is the law. South Africa introduced these rules to empower black citizens. The goal was to address racial inequalities left behind by apartheid. But Elon Musk wants an exception. South Africa's ruling coalition is against this. And to make matters worse, Trump has decided to ignore the G20. South Africa, as we told you, is hosting the summit this year. If this standoff continues, Musk's Starlink will be the least of Trump's concerns. He has wasted no time in his second term. He is moving swiftly to implement his policy agenda. But world leaders seem more prepared this time. They're ready to deal with any surprises from President Trump and confront him head on. Unity is very rare in our world. But yesterday we saw it, all thanks to US President Donald Trump. He unveiled his Gaza plan this week, a plan to remove Palestinians and rebuild the Strip. His end goal is to create a Riviera, a sort of resort town in Gaza, and cue the criticism. European powers, China, Russia, Arab nations, all of them rejected Trump's plan. So his team had to dial it down. Remember, Trump said he would take over Gaza, but the White House has assured that US soldiers will not be used, and they've also refused to fund the rebuild.
The president has not committed to putting boots on the ground in Gaza. He has also said that the United States is not going to pay for the rebuilding of Gaza. His administration is going to work with our partners in the region to reconstruct this region.
So no US troops, no US money. Then what exactly is Trump's contribution? It's like that one member of the group project in school who does nothing but takes the credit. And what about the Gazans? Trump wants Egypt and Jordan to host them. He said they shouldn't return to Gaza because it is unlucky. Again, his team has dialed it down. They say the relocation is temporary.
The only thing President Trump has done very generously, in my view, is offer the United States willingness to step in, clear the debris, clean the place up from all the destruction that's on the ground, clean it up of all these unexploded munitions. And in the meantime, the people living there will not be able, the people who call that home will not be able to live there while you have crews coming in and removing debris, while you have munitions being removed, etc.
So that's what Trump is offering. He will clean up the debris and clear the bombs, which makes sense, I guess. After all, most of the bombs did come from the US. But either way, one thing is clear. This plan is a non-starter. Nobody in West Asia or the world is accepting it, which makes you wonder, where did the idea come from? Who gave this plan to Trump? If you've seen the movie Inception, this will be easier to understand. The movie is about entering another person's dream. Once you enter, you plant an idea in it, and that idea grows into a plan. Something similar seems to have happened here. The Riviera idea probably came from Trump's son-in-law. His name is Jared Kushner. He is married to Trump's daughter, Ivanka. Kushner played a key role in Trump's first term. He was placed in charge of West Asia to strike a comprehensive peace deal for the region. He got mixed results, but in the process, he also made some contacts. He began seeing potential in Gaza, not for peace, but for beachfront tourism. He floated the idea in March last year. Listen to this.
Usually when wars happen, borders are changed historically over time. In Gaza's waterfront property, it could be very valuable to, if people would focus on kind of building up, livelihoods. But I think from Israel's perspective, I would do my best to move the people out and then clean it up.
It's the same plan pitched by Trump. Eject the people, clean out the Strip, and build a Riviera. Trump already has a real estate background, so when Kushner planted the idea, it grew. Which brings us to present day. Trump's West Asia envoy recently visited Gaza. He too has a real estate background. His name is Steve Witkoff. After returning from Gaza, this is what he told Trump.
There's 30,000 unexploded munitions. It is the buildings that could tip over at any moment. There's no utilities there whatsoever. No working water, electric, gas, nothing. God knows what kind of disease might be festering there.
This left an impression on Donald Trump. Plus, he was getting desperate. No one was offering him a feasible plan. The Arab states were not pitching in, and he was told that rebuilding Gaza would take 10 to 15 years, so Trump decided to shake things up, to spur the regional players into action. Apparently, that was the intention of his plan, shock and awe. Now, this strategy has worked in some cases. This week, Trump imposed tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Both countries gave minor concessions. In his first term, he derided and mocked NATO. The allies responded by hiking defense budgets to 2%. So shock and awe can work, and it has worked in the past. But in this case, it backfired spectacularly. The Arab nations are not playing ball. They will never fund the displacement of Palestinians. It shows the limits of Trump's tactics. He sees West Asia as a deal-making landscape. His envoy sees it as one giant real estate deal. That approach did work in the first term. Trump got multiple Arab nations to recognize Israel, but this time he went too far. He thought his personal equations would smoothen differences. Jared Kushner thought so too. He runs a private investment firm nowadays. It is flush with Gulf money. The Saudis have invested $2 billion. The UAE and Qatar have also invested millions. Plus, the Trump organization has assets in the Gulf. They're building towers in Riyadh and Dubai. Was Donald Trump counting on these personal equations? Perhaps he was. But this isn't a normal real estate deal, you see. It's a decades-old conflict. There are lives, emotions, and history at stake, not just a piece of land. Vantage continues after a short break.
Now on, women's sports will be only for women.
President Donald Trump on Wednesday signed an executive order to exclude transgender girls and women from participating in female school sports under his interpretation of Title IX. Reuters correspondent Dan Trotta explains.
Title IX is a law that prevents discrimination on the basis of sex in education. The Trump administration intends to use Title IX as a means to protect women in sports, that is, non-transgender women in sports, to protect them from having to compete against transgender athletes. That's where there could be a true change in policy if it holds up in court.
With my action this afternoon, we're putting every school receiving taxpayer dollars on notice that if you let men take over women's sports teams or invade your locker rooms, you will be investigated for violations of Title IX and risk your federal funding. There will be no federal funding.
Critics say Trump's directive stomps on the rights of a small minority of athletes, but Republicans say the directive restores fairness in sports and protects girls in schools.
So it's something of an open question. But the real issue, as the president of the NCAA said, is that there are less than 10 transgender athletes among the 500,000 participating in collegiate sports. At the high school level, it's impossible to say exactly, but the best estimates are that there are a couple of dozen.
The war on women's sports is over.
Trump's order also instructs the State Department to demand changes within the International Olympic Committee to prevent transgender athletes from competing.
Trump cannot dictate to the International Olympic Committee what its rules ought to be. And this is a matter that has undergone some serious review multiple times by the Olympic Committee.
The Trump administration has taken aim broadly at transgender rights since taking office on January 20th. While Trump supporters have hailed the president for making good on campaign promises, critics say Trump has overstepped his executive authority.
Under the Trump administration, we will defend the proud tradition of female athletes, and we will not allow men to beat up, injure, and cheat our women and our girls. From now on, women's sports will be only for women.
For a lot of trans youth out there, it just means, once again, their country's declaring war on them. And this is going to affect people's mental health. I'll admit it's affected mine, and I'm 53 years old. I mean, but for young people coming up, especially for these kids, and especially in middle school and high school, this is very difficult. This is brutal on them. It's harsh on their families. And don't think that this is the end of it. This is part of a whole program to essentially erase transgender Americans from American life. And yes, just to note, transgender Americans are just that. We're Americans.
Today is another example, at the highest level in seat and position and power in the world, watching the new president of the United States articulate complete, utter nonsense and doing complete harm to the most vulnerable communities in his own society within the boundaries of the United States, which will have generational harm long term.
One win does not make domination. One kid winning one race at a national championship swim meet 3 years ago is not domination. But they're trying to say this fear because, let's face it, Donald Trump knows he's lying about transgender Americans. Riley Gaines knows she's lying about transgender athletes. The thing that they're banking on is that you, the average person out there, doesn't know they're lying. That's what they're banking on.
Female athletes have been forced onto the front lines, and men claiming to be girls have stolen more than 3,500 victories. That's a lot.
And speaking of an emotional response, the return of illegal Indian immigrants from the US has caused a stir in India. More than 100 people, Indians, were sent back on a military plane. They tried to enter the US without visas. They were living there illegally, so their legal status is not in question. Even Indian authorities have no doubts about it. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar addressed the parliament today. He said all countries should take back their citizens if they're living abroad illegally. But the return of these Indians has triggered a political row. Reports say these migrants were handcuffed and chained. Indian opposition parties are up in arms. They say these migrants deserved better treatment. Our next report tells you more.
This video is making waves, both on social media and within India's political circles. The US Border Patrol chief shared it online. It shows illegal Indian immigrants boarding a military plane bound for India. Their hands are cuffed. Their legs are chained. The video comes with an ominous warning. If you cross illegally, you will be removed. This flight, carrying over 100 migrants, landed in Amritsar, a city in India's northern state of Punjab. The Americans had followed the process for the return of these Indians. Indian authorities were kept in the loop as well.
The advance notice was given and there was consular access done. We had checked all the procedures.
Despite that, a controversy has erupted. The move to cuff and chain these migrants has sparked anger within India's opposition parties. This is not a new practice, nor is it reserved exclusively for Indian nationals. India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar conveyed the same thing to Parliament.
Honorable members are aware. It is the obligation of all countries to take back their nationals if they are found to be living illegally abroad. The process of deportation is not a new one. I repeat, not a new one, and has been ongoing for several years. There has been no change, I repeat, no change from past procedure.
Last year, the US deported over 1,000 Indians, but they were sent on commercial flights. Since the year 2009, thousands more have been returned to India. So while Trump's deportation policies may be making headlines, India's stance remains unchanged. For years, it has followed a consistent approach. New Delhi has worked with both Democrats and Republican leaders to curb illegal migration. It now wants to tackle the root causes behind it. In Parliament, Jaishankar announced New Delhi's intent to act against human traffickers. Many of the migrants who returned say they had fallen prey to traffickers. They were promised legitimate American visas in exchange for millions of Indian rupees. Some of the migrants had mortgaged their homes to pay these hefty fees and pursue their American dreams. With the crackdown on illegal migration now intensifying, tackling the issue of human trafficking is the next logical step.
Artificial intelligence has been on a wild ride. Some models are making headlines, others are taking companies down with them. Some are facing bans, while one just landed a prime-time TV spot. Like I said, an exciting time for AI. So let's start with Google. On Wednesday, it released Gemini 2, its most capable artificial intelligence model yet. This includes three main types of models. The first is called 2.0 Flash. It's been called the workhorse model. Then there's the 2.0 Pro Experimental. This is for coding. And finally, we have 2.0 Flashlight. Google calls it the most co-efficient model yet, which is a surprising claim to begin with. For years, the AI world did not care about cost efficiency. Then came China's DeepSeek. The cheap AI model changed the rules. So now doing more with less is the new mantra. But Google is yet to crack it. In a bid to catch up, they're ramping up their AI spending. The company will invest as much as $75 billion. $75 billion to meet the AI demand. It's a considerable jump from 2023. That's when Google spent $32 billion on AI, so this is more than double now. Clearly, Google is throwing money at its AI problem, but Wall Street is not impressed. Google stocks took a nosedive. They were down by 6.9%, making it the company's worst trading session since 2023. Looks like Silicon Valley has a spending problem, and investors, they're done playing along. DeepSeek was blood in the water. Once the sharks got a taste, there was no turning back. Now the investors want cuts from the West. They've seen what cheap AI can do, and they expect Silicon Valley to follow suit.
Clearly, investors are beginning to now question the overall health of the AI revolution and whether or not all of the spending that's taking place as it relates to AI infrastructure is warranted, given the purported success of DeepSeek, as we learned just over a week ago.
Now, DeepSeek may be a game changer, but the West is busy making an example out of it. South Korea just joined the bandwagon. It is blocking DeepSeek in its defense and trade ministries. And Seoul is not alone in doing this. The US, Australia, Italy and Taiwan, they've all restricted the use of DeepSeek. The reason? The same old national security fears. They see DeepSeek as a Trojan horse for data espionage. As for Washington, it is taking things even further. A new report claims DeepSeek's code gives it a backdoor. It allows user data to flow straight to Beijing. So the West is up in arms. They want to keep DeepSeek away. But can they really do that? Let's show you some numbers. In January, the app was downloaded 2.6 million times. It has a user base of 5 to 6 million. And it is growing rapidly. Meanwhile, ChatGPT is losing steam. Back in October, they had 22 million visitors. That number shrank to just 14 million in the month of January. From 22 to 14 million. OpenAI is feeling the heat. And it is responding with a big, bold move. For the first time ever, OpenAI is diving into ads with a Super Bowl commercial. This marks AI's entry into high-stakes marketing, and it does not come cheap. The Super Bowl is America's biggest sports event. It is a gold mine for advertisers. So it's quite the price tag. $8 million for just 30 seconds of airtime. That's what it costs. Because when in doubt, throw money at the problem. So to sum it up, we are here, hurtling towards a future with AI. Governments fear it, investors doubt it, and companies keep lighting money on fire, trying to perfect it. But let's be real, AI is not just a trend anymore, it is everywhere, in our homes, in our phones, and now even our ads. Soon, artificial intelligence won't just be a part of our lives, it will be our lives. And if the past week is any indication, the AI revolution will keep rolling on, so buckle up because the machines have arrived and they're buying ad space. Another day, another Trump executive order. It's called the Keep Men Out of Women's Sports. That's what the order is called. It bans transgender women from female sports. Trump says it restores fairness and that the war on women's sports is over. Since returning to office, the US president has moved swiftly to dismantle transgender rights. So this new order is not different. But it has reignited debates, especially on athletic integrity and transgender rights. Supporters say this protects women in sports, but critics believe it fuels discrimination. Yet the bigger question remains, if bans are not the answer, what is? Our next report explores.
Under the Trump administration, we will defend the proud tradition of female athletes, and we will not allow men to beat up, injure, and cheat our women and our girls. From now on, women's sports will be only for women. It's so ridiculous.
With that, Donald Trump has banned transgender women from female sports. The order takes effect immediately. It applies to high schools, universities, and grassroots sports. Schools allowing trans athletes could face penalties. Violators may even lose federal funding. Now, this order is in line with Trump's previous decisions. Since coming to power, he's dismantled transgender rights. From restricting gender markers on passports to defunding gender-affirming care, Trump's policy is simple. There's only two genders in the United States, that's man and woman.
So in recent years, the radical left has waged an all-out campaign to erase the very concept of biological sex and replace it with a militant transgender ideology. You've heard a little bit about this, haven't you, Hannah? Just a little bit? Does anybody agree with them?
No. Now, a number of sporting governing bodies have made similar moves, banning trans women from female sports. But those usually have a caveat. It's only if the trans women have gone through male puberty. Advocates supporting Trump say biological differences between men and women provide a distinct advantage, especially to athletes who underwent male puberty. Studies cite that testosterone, bone density and muscle mass give trans women a competitive advantage. On the other side, LGBTQ+ groups argue that Trump's order is not about fairness, but about exclusion and political maneuvering. According to an AP survey, more than half the voters said support for trans rights has gone too far. So this is a political move. For trans athletes, participation in sports is about more than competition. It's about identity, community, and equal opportunity. Less than 1% of the US population over the age of 13 is transgender. An even smaller fraction participates in organized sports. That makes the argument that trans women will take over female sports flawed. Critics also fear the policy could be a slippery slope, including invasive regulations and discrimination against all female athletes, not just trans women. So Trump's ban does not provide a solution. It merely removes transgender athletes from one category without offering them an alternative. If trans women cannot compete in female sports, where do they go? Forcing them into male divisions is neither fair nor practical. Many trans athletes undergo hormone therapy that significantly reduces their testosterone levels. So a blanket ban isn't the answer. The real challenge is finding a way to accommodate all athletes in a way that respects their identity while maintaining the integrity of the competition. Until then, transgender athletes remain in limbo, banned from one category, unwelcome in another, and searching for a place to belong.
Our next story is from Bangladesh. There was a protest there yesterday in the capital Dhaka. Though perhaps protest is not the right word, the participants called it a bulldozer procession. They had scheduled it to coincide with a speech given by their ousted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. It was a threat. If she dared to make an address, the protesters would use their bulldozers. Well, Sheikh Hasina did make her speech and the protesters tore down her ancestral home, the house of the founder of their country, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. It's the house he declared independence from, and it's where he was assassinated. Now it is a pile of rubble. Here is our report.
Last night, we saw history being dismantled. A legacy of Bangladeshi independence being trampled upon. Last night, a bulldozer procession made its way through Dhaka. And a mob tore down Dhanmondi 32, the house of Bangladesh's founding father, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. The house was already in ruins before last night. It had been set on fire last August, after protesters in Bangladesh ousted their former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. She was forced to resign and flee Bangladesh last August, but that wasn't enough to quell public anger. So they started dismantling everything associated with Sheikh Hasina, and by extension her father, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. It didn't matter that he was the one who declared Bangladesh's independence from Dhanmondi 32. It didn't matter that he was killed in that house 4 years later. In their anger against Sheikh Hasina, the protesters torched the historic residence-turned-museum in August, and last night they finished the job. They were still at it today, picking the ruins apart.
In the last 15 years, we have seen Hasina use Mujibbat to stay in the power. Hasina used Ekattor, 71. Hasina used other chetonas, other emotions to play with people. And it is one of other emotions of her. She will say, our father were killed by the people, and people needs to vote her. Using those emotions, she stayed on this power. That's why we wanted to destroy this place.
The protesters believed that Sheikh Hasina exploited her father's legacy. She used it to manipulate people and extend her grip on power. That is why they say they targeted the house. But is that really the whole story? The protesters declared their bulldozer procession after Sheikh Hasina scheduled a speech. She was going to address her remaining supporters online. Her party, the Awami League, was to begin a month of protests. They were planning a general strike as well. Sheikh Hasina's speech was going to flag off these actions, but the protesters didn't want her to get involved in Bangladeshi politics ever again.
Why don't you leave us in peace? You and your people looted and emptied the entire country. Now live in luxury as per your wish. Why are you trying to incite Bangladeshi people again?
The bulldozer procession was a threat. If Sheikh Hasina went ahead with her speech, the protesters said she would regret it. Her family home, the site of her father's assassination, would be torn down. Hasina didn't back down after the threat though. She went ahead with her speech. So while she was talking, the protesters tore her family legacy down. As you can imagine, she got emotional.
বাড়িটার কি অপরাধ? ওই বাড়িটাকে কেন এত ভয়? আমি দেশের মানুষের কাছে আজকে বিচার চাই। আমি দেশের জনগণের কাছে বিচার চাই। বলুন আপনারা, আমি কি আপনাদের জন্য কিছুই করিনি? যে স্মৃতিটুকু নিয়ে দুই বোন বেঁচে ছিলাম, আজকে সেই স্মৃতিটুকু ভেঙে ফেলা হচ্ছে। এর আগে আগুন দিয়ে পুড়িয়েছে, আজকে তা ভেঙে ফেলা হচ্ছে। হ্যাঁ, একটা দালান ভেঙে ফেলতে পারে, ইতিহাস মুছতে পারবে না।
And what was Bangladesh's current government doing while all this took place? What did they do as their history was being torn down? They called it unfortunate and undesirable, but then blamed Sheikh Hasina for making inflammatory statements, therefore inciting the mob violence. Basically, they refused to take responsibility. This shows that Bangladesh continues to move towards mob rule, where public anger is allowed to ride roughshod over history.
Let's turn to India now, where a big showdown is unfolding. Foreign auto giants versus tax authorities. Two groups are in the dock. South Korea's Kia Motors and Germany's Volkswagen Group. Both have been accused of the same thing, evading taxes by mislabeling imports. Let's look at the money first. Kia allegedly evaded taxes worth $155 million between the years 2020 and 2022. If they lose the case, they will have to pay double that amount. That's penalty plus interest plus amount, around $310 million in total. That's what they will have to pay. Volkswagen faces an even bigger penalty. Their case dates back to 2012. Since then, the company has allegedly evaded taxes worth $1.4 billion. If you double that, you get the penalty, possibly $2.8 billion in total. Now, both companies have denied these charges, of course. They've also promised to cooperate. The Volkswagen case is heading to court. The Bombay High Court will take it up on the 17th of this month. We leave the judgment to them. Instead, let's look at the allegations. What are they, and what do they mean for the companies and the Indian auto market? In India, you can import cars in different ways. What you choose will decide your tariff rate. Say you're importing a fully assembled car, ready to drive out, then the tariff is 100%. But if you can also import cars in the CKD form. CKD is completely knocked down. The product gets delivered as individual parts. You simply assemble it on site. This type of import is taxed between 30 to 35%. Now, what if you're not importing a car? What if you're just importing separate parts? Then the tax is just 10 to 15%. Now, the government says Kia and Volkswagen tricked the system. They mislabeled CKD shipments as separate parts. Sometimes the parts were sent to different ports. Sometimes they were dispatched over days, all to evade suspicion, to pay 10 to 15% tax instead of 35% tax. So the government was on to them. They raided multiple Volkswagen facilities. They also questioned top executives, and finally they slapped fines on both these groups. Now we come to the impact. Kia entered the Indian market in 2019. Unlike other foreign makers, they have done well. In 2024, they had 6.6% market share. India is their fourth largest market in the world. Volkswagen, though, is a different story. Most of their cars serve a different category of customers. Their market share is just 2.2%, but the group is betting on growth. Skoda, which is part of Volkswagen, is leading this campaign. They unveiled a mini SUV named Kailak last year. This year, they're unveiling an even smaller SUV, which is very significant because this is the biggest segment in India. In that context, this tax case is a setback for both companies. It also puts the focus on India's tariffs. Many auto giants have complained about this, including Elon Musk and Tesla. Musk wants to import assembled cars to India, but those attract 100% tariff. He is lobbying the government to reduce that rate. New Delhi has not budged yet. Also, there are troubles coming at a sensitive time, a time when foreign auto firms are leaving India. Fiat, Ford, Datsun, Chevrolet, Mitsubishi. All of these companies have left India. Could tax troubles trigger more exits? Well, leaving because of losses is one thing, but this is about the law. If you have a tariff rate, you must abide by it. No one is above the law, not even foreign auto giants. Having said that, they have every right to appeal, to put their case before the court, and that is where India can possibly do more. Tax litigation often takes a long time in India. Experts say up to 15 years. This delay is painful for companies and the government. Maybe that's an area to address. Vantage continues after a short break.
Now on, women's sports will be only for women.
President Donald Trump on Wednesday signed an executive order to exclude transgender girls and women from participating in female school sports under his interpretation of Title IX. Reuters correspondent Dan Trotta explains.
Title IX is a law that prevents discrimination on the basis of sex in education. The Trump administration intends to use Title IX as a means to protect women in sports, that is, non-transgender women in sports, to protect them from having to compete against transgender athletes. That's where there could be a true change in policy if it holds up in court.
With my action this afternoon, we're putting every school receiving taxpayer dollars on notice that if you let men take over women's sports teams or invade your locker rooms, you will be investigated for violations of Title IX and risk your federal funding. There will be no federal funding.
Critics say Trump's directive stomps on the rights of a small minority of athletes, but Republicans say the directive restores fairness in sports and protects girls in schools.
So it's something of an open question, but the real issue, as the president of the NCAA said, is that there are less than 10 transgender athletes among the 500,000 participating in collegiate sports. At the high school level, it's impossible to say exactly, but the best estimates are that there are a couple of dozen.
The war on women's sports is over.
Trump's order also instructs the State Department to demand changes within the International Olympic Committee to prevent transgender athletes from competing.
Trump cannot dictate to the International Olympic Committee what its rules ought to be. And this is a matter that has undergone some serious review multiple times by the Olympic Committee.
The Trump administration has taken aim broadly at transgender rights since taking office on January 20th. While Trump supporters have hailed the president for making good on campaign promises, critics say Trump has overstepped his executive authority.
Under the Trump administration, we will defend the proud tradition of female athletes, and we will not allow men to beat up, injure, and cheat our women and our girls. From now on, women's sports will be only for women.
For a lot of trans youth out there, it just means, once again, their country's declaring war on them. And this is going to affect people's mental health. I'll admit it's affected mine, and I'm 53 years old. I mean, but for young people coming up, especially for these kids, and especially in middle school and high school, this is very difficult. This is brutal on them. It's harsh on their families. And don't think that this is the end of it. This is part of a whole program to essentially erase transgender Americans from American life. And yes, just to note, transgender Americans are just that. We're Americans.
Today is another example, at the highest level in seat and position and power in the world, watching the new president of the United States articulate complete, utter nonsense and doing complete harm to the most vulnerable communities in his own society within the boundaries of the United States, which will have generational harm long term.
One win does not make domination. One kid winning one race at a national championship swim meet 3 years ago is not domination. But they're trying to say this fear because, let's face it, Donald Trump knows he's lying about transgender Americans. Riley Gaines knows she's lying about transgender athletes. The thing that they're banking on is that you, the average person out there, doesn't know they're lying. That's what they're banking on.
Female athletes have been forced onto the front lines, and men claiming to be girls have stolen more than 3,500 victories. That's a lot. And invaded more than 11,000 competitions designed for women.
First of all, the numbers they don't exist. Understand that there's 0.01% gender variant people living in our society as a whole. So it's a very tiny grouping of people that he's actually targeting. And certainly the numbers in terms of gender performance are filled with inaccuracies as well. Those numbers just don't exist. And it's incomprehensible of somebody in the highest seat in the world, the most powerful seat in the world, to project such misinformation, not just in the United States, but globally on such an issue that has a tremendous impact in the United States, but also worldwide.
We have to learn now. If we
They say love is blind, but sometimes it's also stupid. Let me introduce Onija Andrew Robinson, a 33-year-old woman from New York. She met a 19-year-old Pakistani boy online and fell in love. Last year, she flew to Karachi to marry him. Just one problem, though. The boy and his family rejected the match. Robinson first responded by camping outside their house. When that failed, she held a press conference. Her demand? That Pakistan's government should pay her $100,000. Frankly, that's the joke. That anyone would think Pakistan could spare $100 grand. Robinson has now become an online sensation. People are making memes and reels with her comments. Take a look.
I'm not talking unless y'all giving me land and 2,000 or more every week. I don't live here, I'm chilling.
Why you come in Pakistan?
I demand from the government more than $5,000 in USD to make Pakistan a better place. Good night. Mind your business. What? Talk.
Tell me, you have a Pakistani passport?
I'm getting one. Do you have one? Saying he talked too much. That's it.
Yes, that's it. Yes, I am saying. ये भी देखे यही मेरी बात की तारीफ कर रही है.
Listen, you talk too much. It's not.
Come here, please come here.
Listen, shh.
Please.
Be quiet. I'm not sitting down. My plan is to reconstruct this whole country, okay? I'm asking for 100K or more. I need 20K by this week, okay? In my pockets, in cash. I'm not talking unless y'all giving me land and 2,000 or more.
I'm not talking unless y'all giving me land and 2K or more every week. You hear me? I'm getting my Pakistani passport and my Pakistani ID. You cannot get Pakistani ID. I'm getting it. Do you agree? We do not agree.
Unless y'all giving me land and 2,000 or more every week. You hear me? Yep. I'm getting my Pakistani passport and Pakistani ID. I'm getting it. Do y'all agree?
I need 20,000 at the end of the day for my lipo. Okay? 20,000. 30,000.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Russia practices stealth maneuvers of intercontinental ballistic missiles. Cold snap brings heavy snowfall to several parts of Japan. And vintage sports cars go up for auction at the Grand Palais in Paris. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1958, tragedy struck the world of football. A plane carrying the Manchester United football team crashed at the Munich airport. 23 people lost their lives, including 8 players. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Hello and welcome to the Late Night Edition with me, Ayushman Singh Jamwal. Our top story, the political storm over the deportation of Indian nationals from the United States continues to escalate as the opposition protested, accusing the Modi government of being powerless to stop the inhumane treatment by the American immigration officials, namely after Donald Trump has ordered a mass deportation drive across the country. The Congress says that those deported